Welcome to the Faith at Work podcast. Eric Davis is here with us today. He is the director of the Wesley Foundation at the University of Southern Mississippi here in Hattiesburg. Eric, we're so glad to have you on. How are you?
Hi, man. I'm glad to be here. And Blake, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation and what it means to exercise faith and do good work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're so excited to have you here. And people think like, oh, well, he's a Wesley Foundation director. He's a preacher man, as some people would say. And, of course, he teaches faith stuff. Well, to be a pastor, as he's been a youth pastor and a head pastor of church and now Wesley Foundation director. So he knows that there's a lot of administration, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of rejection and other things that you encounter just outside of preaching a sermon or doing things like that. So I really wanted to get his perspective on this and how his faith and how Jesus has impacted his workplace through his career. So, Eric, how about you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're born, where you grew up, that kind of stuff. The classic tell us about yourself question.
The faith journey or the life journey.
Yes, and I was going to talk about faith journey next too, so if you want to dive into that, you can too.
I think my story is just one of those things that's kind of prepared me for moving and being appointed as a preacher in the Methodist Church all the time. I think the longest I lived in a town or a location for a long time was 4 years. And I grew up in Starkville. Both my parents worked at Mississippi State, and so I've grown up on a college campus. Lived in Scuba, Mississippi, Scuba Tech. Lived there for about 4 years. While my dad was in administration, and watched that for a good bit, and spent a little time up in North Mississippi, a little school called West Union, and then went to Mississippi College, a community that I need to be at, and a university that is a community that is really based in Christian principles, and that's where I met my wife, Christine. We have chapel at Mississippi College. You have to go to chapel, and I was a junior in chapel, and Christine was a sophomore, and I saved a seat for her.
Yeah.
And I texted her. I said, "Hey, I got you a seat." She said, "Oh no, I'm okay over here." And, so immediately the chase was on. But the bigger backstory is that I was a junior in sophomore chapel. I skipped chapel my freshman year, and I was known to sleep in the back of chapel. So if the president of MC is listening right now, he knows this. I've already told him. And I think that our journey began really as a chase, if you will, and one of those things where, for me, I was avoiding this call to ministry for a long time, and I didn't want to do it. I wanted to coach basketball. It's what I know and what I grew up in, and the call to ministry was something that I just wanted to avoid and stay away from, and just kind of hide away from it. And Christine, one night, she said, "Eric, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life?" And I thought, okay, if the two of us are going to, do this journey together, and we're going to make our way toward marriage one day, I'm just going to scare her away, or she's going to accept this call. And I said, "I'm called to be a Methodist minister." And she looked at me and said, "Okay, get to it." And that's really the skyrocket from that point on. Like, that just escalated everything. Was a youth minister for a little short time before seminary to Asbury, and came back, was in youth ministry again for just a year. Ended up in a little small town outside of Clinton, Bolton. Got to start a campus ministry, be a part of being a senior pastor, and then also teaching classes on college campuses. And I've just found it natural that the season of life, college, those 4 years, 6, 7, 8, depending on how long,
right.
That's just a natural place for me to meet people, and really enjoyed every aspect of ministry. But there's something pivotal about students as they are wrestling with who they are and whose they are, providing a space for them to wrestle with that and wrestle with God's grace in that, and God's grace maybe even wrestle with them. So, I think it's a fun time. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. And
that's awesome. Side note, Christine, the Davises are good friends with the Moores. James, their son, and my daughter, Nora James, are about the same age, and they've been essentially dating since for the last year or so, or almost 2 years now. Not really, but they're really, really good friends. And Emily Bell, his daughter, and my son Jonah are also really close. So we got we got good family friends here in the Davises. So, but that's just a side note. Most people in our church know about the relationship between James and Nora James. So
They see it every Sunday morning. Right?
every Sunday morning, yeah. I think that's what they miss most during this whole pandemic stuff. So, well, what kind of? I know you touched on it a little bit there, but you said you were a youth pastor for a little bit as well as a head pastor at a church. What drove you? I know the development of students during the time of knowing who they are or trying to figure that out. I mean, what kind of established being a Wesley Foundation director, a campus minister director? Like how did you get to that point?
Well, it took a long time, honestly. When I was in seminary up at Asbury College, Asbury University, I was sitting there for a year, bored, not doing ministry, and I went across to Asbury University and said, "Hey, if you guys need somebody to do a small group, I would love to do one for some guys over here." I played basketball, and immediately their ears perked. Next thing I knew, I had about 10 freshman guys from the basketball team were in my small group, and immediately we started meeting and just meeting. Next thing I knew, it ended up I got a coaching job out of it, coaching for Asbury University. And I was sitting there, I was like, I love this life. Like, I love this time period.
Yeah.
And so it was like a burning and a tug to be in that season of other people's lives. And so it's just a neat thing. And so coming back to Mississippi, I was just like, how can I be in college ministry? And so my youth, they were in college at that point, would call me, hey, what do I do about this? What about that? And I was just like, man, there's that tugging again. There's that burning. And so I really kind of had to make it happen at Hines, just had to birth a college ministry to be in college ministry.
Yeah.
And then USM opened up in 2018, and I was sitting there saying, I'm comfortable, but there's still that little tug, that little pull. And so found myself making a journey here out of faith.
Yeah.
Leaving a lot of comfort, a lot of security with Christine's job, with my job, and making a journey to run a nonprofit, a campus ministry that really doesn't have people that are tithing on a weekly basis, that are doing those type of things, but instead, you're really building relationships with community that find themselves saying, I believe in that vision to have a campus ministry for students at USM that are coming from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, or around the world. Yeah. And how can we empower that? So that's the big picture.
Yeah. Well, so a lot of people in our audience may not know, and I think a lot of people across the world don't really understand. I think maybe they just have how do I want to say it? I don't know, just a nicer picture in their head about the lives of pastors. That pastors are apparently above actual people because they have maybe a better connection to God or whatever. So, but in reality, we are human beings and we face a lot of things. Can you touch on a little bit of some of the frustrations and the negative things that you have gone through in your journey in ministry to kind of have our audience understand that, like, wait, we're actually, humans too.
Yeah, and I think about the hard choices and the hard decisions that we have to make. And I remember as a youth minister, if you've been in youth ministry or any type of work with youth, you have to make hard decisions. And you have to make hard choices like, hey, sorry, you can't do that. Or, hey, sorry, you can't go on this trip. Or, hey, here are the rules for the trip. Or being in community together. And I remember one night I went home and I got home and I told Christine, I was like, I'm done. I'm getting fired. They're going to call a meeting and, it's over. Something happened. Something was broken at the building or somebody's being too reckless or whatever. And those moments of just tension. Yeah. And the same thing at the church. Just leading the church. I love to watch people grow. Mm-hmm. But with growth comes that big word, change. Mm-hmm. And nobody likes change. I think the only change that we want right now is getting out of this pandemic, right? Getting out of this season of being quarantined. Mm-hmm. That's the change we all want. Go back to how we were. Right. But in normal life, we don't like change, but it's in that tension and that change that growth does happen. Mm-hmm. And, I've seen myself, in myself, see something, a vision of somebody or a goal of somebody. Of man, if you make this decision, if you decide to change this, growth will happen. And really challenging people to do that is probably the hardest thing. I'm on the Enneagram. I'm a challenger, and so I really wrestle with when do I step in. When do I step in and help nurture that change, whether it's the community or whether it's an individual, and knowing when to do that, when not to do that. And it's a hard thing.
Yeah.
I look back over my little short time in Bolton, and I look back over it and I go, man, I don't know if I could ever walk in those shoes again. I think I've learned a lot about myself. And I was doing 3 jobs nonstop, and I personally now I want a slower pace. I want to work smarter and not harder. And so I'm just during this season, this quarantine, I'm examining myself, saying, how can I work smarter? And not feel like I'm burning myself. Right. And so, this in ministry, what I've seen is I like to go. Yeah. There's like kind of this little spark in me that it just ignites, and I already see step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I can see it just like that, even if I'm not there. Yeah. But that's also exhausting. Yeah. So, I think this, for me, knowing when to take slow steps, knowing when to slow down, I think the countless people that told me, maybe they told you too, Blake, take time for yourself. Yeah. Take time for your family.
I'm really bad at that. I'm really bad at that. Like
that's probably the hardest thing, right?
I always struggle with am I doing enough? Like that's my issue. Like, am I doing enough? And that's been the thing through this whole pandemic. Like, am I doing enough for my seniors who had their year cut off? Am I doing enough as the youth pastor to let our students and their families know that I'm here for them and I'm trying to do as much as I can? But then on the other side of that, and maybe probably the more important side of that is, am I being there enough for my family? Yeah. Like, they're my first ministry. Am I there for my wife who's been loved? Who's, by the way, ministers' wives are rock, right? I mean.
Oh and then some, right?
Yes, and then absolutely. And so, that's the tension that I'm always at. Like, am I doing enough for my family? Am I being the best husband, the best best father, as well as a youth minister? And all that, and that's what kind of what I struggle with.
So, I think what your bigger question might be is, how is home life for the ministers? Husband and wife. The kids. Yeah. What is that like? Yeah. And as
tell us a little bit about it, Eric. That's a great question. That's a great point, because nobody thinks about that either, I don't think.
No, and it's those hard decisions that leaders make, and then you go home and you brew about it and you think about it and you think, I shouldn't do it, and your spouse, is saying, no, you need to do that. Like, they see all your abilities, all your capabilities, and a lot of people out, in the community and the congregation, they don't see that support that's happening inside of those 4 walls. That emotional support, that just overall belief in their significant other. And so for us, for Christine and I, that's really the biggest thing is I see a step to take, and she's the one that's really saying, no, you can take that step. Yeah. You can do that.
Even though call to ministry, right? I mean, and it's the same thing for Rebecca and I with this job at Main Street. Like, we saw the application, and I was just like, hey, I know that church has got some good people, but it's whatever. She was like, let me look at this real quick, and then she was the one. She's like, I think you need to apply for this. Yeah. So I feel you on that for sure. And that support, I mean, it means the world. Like, I couldn't do what I do without her. And then on the flip side of that, like I said, I want to make sure that I focus on them first before them being my first ministry, my family. Like, I want to make sure that I'm doing what I'm called to do for them, because out of the home ministry comes out our youth ministry. I think whatever works out and what's going on in there is going to affect, what happens on Sunday night with our kids. So
that's right, and they're watching, right? They're seeing that. Not that you are the perfect example, right? Not that your family unit is up there, but it's more of a lens for them to look through and see the possibilities of their life. Yeah. And so that's a good question.
Well, I think you asked it, which is great. So in those tensions and in the hard choices, and then the maybe sometimes rejection that we feel as ministers, and sometimes the frustrations of like, we know that ministry is not about numbers, but sometimes it is. And, there's also frustrations of like, why do we have 10 people tonight as opposed to when we had 35 last week or whatever the number may be. And so in all of that, in the hard choices, in the family life and stuff, how has your personal faith played a role in the impact and facing of those situations?
Yeah. And, in campus ministry, especially youth ministry, people are looking, the first question is, how many come to worship? How many this, how many that? And, for me, it's always tied up in, worship doesn't begin with us. Grace and love, they don't begin with us, and so there's greater source. And my faith, being tied into that is that whoever comes that night, that's who needed to be there. Those are the individuals that needed to hear that word, and those are the ones that join together. And I know at the Wesley, for us, so many times, one of our leaders, I'm always repeating to him, hey man, worship doesn't begin with us. But I'm hearing that from Christine because I'm sitting here like, oh my gosh, do you think anybody's coming tonight? Do you think it's going to be a good night? All those type of things. And she's saying, here, it doesn't begin with us. It doesn't start with us. And so she's passing that on to me that I'm able to pass on to someone else. And so the faith aspect is that whatever the work that we are doing is the work that God is working through to others. And so it might be like passing out boxes of produce like yesterday. And Alex from Nigeria is sitting with me, and I got a Zoom meeting that's about to start, and I'm driving the bus in a Zoom meeting, and I'm like, Alex, can you drop them off? He's like, yeah, we got it. So he's running, dropping all these boxes, and I'm in the Zoom meeting, talking about campus ministry and ours and how to do it better. And
this is campus ministry. Look at this.
This is it. This is happening right now. And the biggest thing right now for me was, I was sitting there going, man, if Alex wouldn't have shown up, that wouldn't have happened. And it was just a huge, for me, a growth in my faith, knowing that there are others out there that want to partner and do ministry together. And so, I learned something a long time ago from one of my friends as he made his faith journey and worked in it. I reflected on it, and your yes leads to somebody else's yes. And, for me, saying yes to this call of ministry allowed someone else to say yes to maybe their call, vocational ministry or pastoral, So, so many times with your faith and walking in faith, it's your yes that is opening the door for somebody else. You just can't see it right now.
Yeah.
That's faith.
That's great. That's good. That's good. That's a word. That's good. I was, the biggest thing I struggle with as a pastor, as a youth pastor, is not seeing the fruit of my labor. And that's something I've always struggled with, even as an intern, when I was a youth intern, or even as just a student leader. Like, it was always on God. I'd always put it on God, when it was not. But because He never tells us in Scripture that we are called to see the fruit of our labor. We're not. We're just called to plant the seed. And if we get to see that, then I think it's a blessing. It's grace that God has allowed us to see it. But if not, it's still grace. It's still a blessing that we get to be a part, and it's a privilege to be a part of the calling that God has given us. And I have to remind myself every day, because there could be specific students that I've been trying to hammer some certain things on, and I don't see any kind of growth or any kind of change. But I have to remind myself, I'm also a human. I don't know what's going on in their hearts. God can see what's going on, and I need to be faithful in that. God is what's going to be. He's going to grow that seed, and that's always been the issue with me. But praise be to God that He has continued to remind me that I've got this. Like, you just be faithful in taking the steps that I've set for you, and I've got everything else. It's just like, God, thank you. So the faith in the workplace for me has been hard because it changes your perspective, right? I mean, perspective is everything in this world, and what shapes your perspective, obviously changes how you see the positive things in your life as well as the negative things. So how has faith in the regards to perspective and seeing things differently, how has that played out in your career journey?
Yeah, I think there's something that was instilled in me in seminary, and it's an acronym. It's STP. You might have seen it before, you know.
I think you told me about this. I think, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's see the people, say the prayers, you know, sing the psalms, and so see the people, see the potential, and each and every individual has potential, and I think you're knocking on it, sowing the seeds, and there's that beautiful parable that somebody goes out to sow seeds, and each soil that they throw it on is different types of soil. There's good, there's rocky, there's thorns, you know, and so and each one has a different outcome. But we're not called to decide which soil we're to throw seeds on. You know, we're not called to say, "Hey, Eric,
you deserve Jesus, and you don't."
You
know, we can't do that. Yeah.
Go to that part of campus. Don't go to that part of campus. Go to that dorm. Go to this place. You know, instead it's go across go across. You know, all the schools, and as you are sowing seeds, it's your obedience. It's your obedience and your continual obedience to doing that good work. When I was a youth minister, I felt a nudge, you know, from the Holy Spirit to go and every week have lunch with the junior high. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do that. You know, I know what the cafeteria is like at the junior high, like food fight, whatever it is. You know. But I just started doing that, you know, and I went to the principal and said, hey, can I do this? The principal said, sure. You know, just another male presence in the cafeteria. And I'll never forget, I would see my guys. I'd always go to them, hey, how you guys doing? They're like, oh man, my youth minister's here, you know. And they loved it, but at the same time,
straighten up.
You know, it was like a dad figure, right? You know, and or like that big brother, whatever. And I'll never forget that Christmas. We were doing a Christmas program at the church, and a mom walked up to me and said, you've been having lunch with my son every week this semester. Thank you. And said, we'll be in this community. We'll be in your church from this point on. And I said, oh, what's your son's name? And she told me her son's name. And I started thinking, I don't know who he is. I don't know if I've met him. I was really like struggling. Yeah. And lo and behold, you know, her son was quiet on the outside of the table each and every week, and I never specifically interacted with him and said, hey, how you doing, man? Let me get your number. Let's come to youth, come to my church. He just watched something taking place, and so it was my obedience to that nudge of saying, I'm gonna take this faith step. I'm gonna go to this junior high, you know, and I'm gonna go sit in this cafeteria every week, and I don't know what's gonna happen, and it might be good soil, bad soil, right? But I'm just called to go out and sow those seeds. And
how cool, how faithful is God in that He showed you, like, that's what He's done for me. Like, anytime I've even doubted a little, He'll send a parent or somebody, or He'll send me, somebody will send me a text or whatever, and be like, hey, you did this, and it was great. We were so thankful. And I'm just like, what? You know, because, like, I either thought that I screwed that up, or I didn't do enough, or I didn't do that, and, like, you know, and God sends those gentle reminders, and sometimes I miss out on that because I don't sit still enough. You know, for me, I've got to continue to work on to be still and know. You know, it's just because God is whispering all the time, but it's up to me to stop and hear, like, listen for Him. You know, and I've got to open up my eyes and not be blind to what He's doing, because He's moving. You know, He's doing things every second of every day, and He's wanting all of us to be a part of it. But we need to. You know, this is such a fast-paced world, like. And, you know, He's not going to go the way of this world. You know, He's wants us to be still, listen to what what He has for us, and then to take a step of faith. And that's so cool that He, you know, in my opinion, He had that parent come up to you and say, hey, you're doing something good here because my son's really enjoying this lunch. So that's really cool.
It was just a little blip, but, you know, not deciding which is best, where's best. Because every time you get in that posture of judgment, right, you're going to fall flat every time. Right. And when you begin to limit your view of what God can do, you know, and you begin to box in God, you're going to fall flat every time. That's been a wrestle, right? Yeah.
And who are we? Like, who are we to think we can tell somebody they can't hear about Jesus? You know, like, if Jesus has talked to me, then I know He can talk to everybody else. You know, like, you know, That's what Paul says. Like, I'm a sinner of the very worst, and so that's what I love about Jesus, about Christ, that there's so much grace and so much joy and hope to be had, even for people who think they are the worst. And that kind of drives me to keep me doing what I do, because I want people to know that they're loved. Like, I want students to know that you've made mistakes, you've made bad decisions or whatever, but you were still pursued and you were still loved and you were still valued and worthy by Jesus. And there is hope, and He wants this life for you. And so that kind of that's what drives me in ministry. So that kind of leads me. What drives you? What kind of? I know it's a big question. We still got a few minutes, so what gets you up in the morning every day to do what you do?
I think you're asking what's the why.
Yeah.
Why?
You ask better questions than I do. You should be leading this podcast.
The why, and I think the why goes across the board. It doesn't matter if you're doing ministry, coaching basketball, librarian down the road.
Right. Yes.
Your why is what is going to just in the tough times. And so we're in the middle of a pandemic, and what's the Eric? What's your why? And I think for me, it's providing that space for grace to happen wherever it is, and for students to experience God's grace. And it doesn't look the way it should right now, but it might be a text message. Mm-hmm. It might be a letter in the mail. Mm-hmm. It might be, hey, how you doing? Been thinking about, whatever it is. But for me, my why and the drive to the why is for students and individuals to experience God's grace and to experience it in a particular space. And, I've seen that time and time again. I think that's the hardest thing about the quarantine right now. You can't be in space together.
Right.
And so you have to do unique things for that. So for me, my why is deep in the sense that I was that college student, that youth, that individual that just needed somebody to step in and provide that space. And so many points in my life, there wasn't somebody. There was a lack of somebody providing that space wherever it was. It might have been the basketball court. It might have been at school, and wherever it was. And so, for me, it's always seeking to wherever I am to do that. For Christine, it's making others feel welcomed, and that's her why. If she shows up to Wesley, she is like beelining to somebody, and because she wants others to feel welcomed in a space. And so, it's that why is that deep just drive that no matter the pandemic, no matter what's going on behind the scenes, and those hard decisions, when you wake up in the morning, it's like, okay, we got some good work to do. And faith is that just nurturing that I'm going to take the step, and I'm going to take the step to provide this space. And God, you're going to show up and show out every time.
That's awesome. I would want to end there, but I got one more question for you. Okay, you got a minute.
Okay,
this is gonna be hard. What advice would you have for your students at Wesley, my students at the church, or really anybody when it comes to your faith in your job now or in your career? Like, what kind of advice would you be able to give in regards to a student's or anybody's career journey and how that your faith intersects with that?
Yeah, find a mentor. Wherever you are right now in life, 7th grader, 9th grader, freshman, senior,
40-year-old,
it doesn't matter. Find a mentor. Paul had a Timothy and Timothy had a Paul. Find somebody that can pour their life into you and pour their faith journey into you. That's the big thing right now. Because right now somebody's probably been reaching out to you, wanting to be that mentor, but for you to go to them and say, will you mentor me? Will you disciple me? Will you pour your life? And I did that when I was in seminary. Dr. Stamps, my mentor, 74-year-old, he has more fire when he preaches than anybody I know, loves people. I was going to seminary, and I did not want to go to seminary. And I watched him. I went up to him, and I said, you got it, and I want it. And he looked at me and said, well, you got it, brother. And we started meeting every week. So find a mentor.
I'm glad I asked that one question because that was great. That was awesome. I love that so much. Well, we're so grateful to have you. I'm grateful to be your friend. I really am. And there's a lot of wisdom that you brought today. A lot of good words. So we're so thankful for you, and I'm so appreciative that you come on our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
we look forward to maybe having you come to youth a couple times because, if anything, I think the youth are a little tired of hearing from me. So, but thank you so much for being on this podcast. We will we'll release another episode here pretty soon with a couple new guests, so please be on the lookout for that. And Eric, once again, we thank you so much.
Thanks, man. To the top.
To the top. To the top.